myself, the Mazzarelli brothers, and a handful of other people, said when we were all locked down and the government was overreaching, that we needed to stand up and get together and start communicating, because the government wanted to break us apart from communicating. And I think our speakers tonight are really going to emphasize what they went through in China and what China is doing and how they're influencing us here in America. So not to belabor myself, but to introduce our co-host. Where is she, Mila? So let's hear a warm welcome to our host, Mila.
Thank you, Dean. First, I need to grow a few inches for all of you can see me. My name is Mela. I'm from Mount Hope Chinese Association. For those of you who do not know what that is, I forgive you. Because we just stepped out of Orange County today. We formed about over a year ago in Orange County, and we have been very active. Our mission is to restore the traditional Chinese values, such as wisdom, loyalty to your family, hardworking, which are universal values, and also to share the beauty of Chinese culture. But to do that, we need to eradicate the contamination of Chinese Communist Party culture. And the communist culture is not alone to the mainland China. It's evident that it's everywhere. In fact, we have a series of beautiful, 2 copies of beautiful books in the back called How the Specter of Communism is Ruling the World. I hope you take them home and read them. And we have done very successful seminars as this, called Wake Up to the CCP Threat seminars. We've done them in Mount Hope and Deer Park, Middletown, Warwick, and other places. We've received very strong, warm responses from the audiences, and we got invited. Thank you, Dean. Thank you, folding chair. And thank you also, Orange Strong, even though my friend Chip Murray is not here, and also Global Service Center for Quitting the CCP. They are the co-sponsors of the event. And without further ado, let me first, let's invite the panelists. We have a very outstanding group of panelists today. And David Zhang, wave your hand. He's from China Insight. China Insight. He's the host of China Insight. And he will introduce the rest of the panels. Some of them you probably already know. I know, they are quite very well established, very well known in the field. And also after the panelists share their insights, we will ask the audience for questions. Okay, so thank you. Give them a warm round of applause.
Hello. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for taking your evening time to be with us tonight. Obviously, you came, and this is a very important issue for you guys as well, and it's something that we've been talking a lot about, but I think it's worthy of a panel discussion because we have different panelists from different fields of studies, and they've covered this topic extensively. So first I'll introduce briefly who I am, and then I'll introduce the panelists. So my name is David Zhang, and I host China Insider on YouTube and on Ganjing World. And I spend my day exploring and discussing China of various different topics. And I grew up in China, and so I have firsthand experience of what communism is like in China and of the various practices or malpractices and threats that we're going to discuss today. They very much relate to me personally and my experience growing up. And so I guess let's just start with a brief context, right? So everybody went through the pandemic, and people started questioning where did this virus come from? And the Chinese regime, the government in Beijing, as well as the ruling Chinese Communist Party, didn't give us an answer. To this day, they still deny the existence of the virus that came from Wuhan. And so throughout this whole time, you might have realized that something is wrong. A partner that we've had for over 40 years, decades of engagement with them, overseas across the Pacific Ocean has failed to provide us the most fundamental credibility that a government should have or a nation should have. And so many of you maybe started looking online for answers, but you couldn't get the straight answers. And so I hope our panel tonight can give you some of those answers. We won't have all of the answers. We'll have some of the answers. But I think the most important part is getting everyone engaged and start to think about the deeper issues that matter to us. Obviously, our focus is going to be on the threat of the CCP in America. And I think that's really important because this is what threatens our lives every single day. And so I hope our panelists today will give you what they think is the most important issue to be aware of. Now, we also hope to answer a lot of the questions as to how did this come about? And what, for example, like the southern border, the fentanyl issues, or the virus, or the politics, or even the economy. A lot of these things, hope you guys will have a lot of great questions for us later on this evening. Now, let me just briefly introduce our panelists before we get into our discussion. So, sitting in the second seat there to the left is Dr. Xiaoshu Shanlin, and he is a former U.S. Army officer and microbiologist, co-founder of the CCP Biothreats Initiative, member of the Committee of Present Danger China, and assistant professor at the Biomedical Science Department in Phaeton College, Middletown. All right, let's give a round of applause for Dr. Shanlin.
Thank you.
And we also have next to Dr. Shanlin, to my left here, is Josh Phillip. You might have seen his documentaries or maybe his show, The Crossroads, on Epoch TV and the Epoch Times. And his most recent documentary is one where I truly enjoyed and is very insightful into China, which is called The Final War, The 100-Year Plot to Defeat America. And that's streaming on Epoch TV. So he extensively detailed the processes and the brain thinking behind how the CCP has systematically tried to invade America and destroy the system that we have. And so let's give Josh a round of applause as well. And then we have Kay Rubacek. She is sitting to the left there. She is an award-winning producer of film and TV. She's also an author and expert on communism and socialism. Kay's family actually fled communism regimes in Russia and China. And so she has interviewed over 100 communist survivors. Many of them come from communist China as well. So a round of applause for her. And finally, we have the native from this area here, Chris Bob. He is a Hudson Valley-based researcher specializing in communism's influence in the religious denominations. And he currently holds a role of program manager of subscriptions at the Epoch Times in Manhattan. All right, so round of applause for Chris. Okay, so we'll jump right into the questions. And the first one I really want to ask is for Sean. It's about, recently you've seen the news, you know that the CCP has removed its foreign minister and defense minister, and they both disappeared from public eye. So how does something like this just happen to a government? Sean, do you want to tell us what's happening in China? Why is its domestic economy also imploding, and what's the deal there?
Well, good evening, everyone. Such an interesting question at the beginning because so much drama happening nowadays in China. Probably CCP never shut up dramas, scandals, secrets, and so it's a very, very fascinating time to actually watch Chinese news nowadays. And so in June, the foreign minister, Qin Gang, disappeared. And for several weeks, nobody knows where he is. And then on the internet, it exploded his extramarital affairs. And while he was actually a Chinese ambassador in the United States, even have a son. So these affairs, of course, triggered nationwide attention for these disappearance of Qin Gang, of the foreign ministers in China. And then people later realized he was actually removed from the post. And so this is a very interesting drama at the beginning of summer. Then recently, the defense minister, Li Shangfu, also disappeared. Actually, since August 29. Then later on, there are news being released saying that he was actually arrested on September 8th. But the Chinese government always like to do this in secret. So even at the beginning, nobody knows where are these ministers, right? So and when the foreign journalists ask China's foreign spokesperson, they always say, we don't know the situation. And so it's probably very, very hard to imagine in the United States, suddenly one day you, for several weeks or months, your foreign minister and defense minister disappear, and nobody knows where it is. But in China, it just happened because this is operated by CCP's nature, because they like to using this secrecy to show the CCP's leadership in complete control, especially for Xi Jinping. So the removal of these two ministers actually originally picked by Xi Jinping himself. They are his loyalties. But why those two ministers actually suddenly disappear? So there are many scenarios, but here I'd like to say one of the potential scenarios is that there are conflict between the China's foreign ministry as well as the defense ministry, because the foreign ministries always want to act like a war wolf. They want to say we are rising and the Western society is declining, and we should act stronger. We should dominate the world. We should set up the world stage. We should set up the standard for the international society. And they act strong. But the defense ministry know China's People's Liberation Army is not ready for war. They know if they fight with the United States, they will lose. Even they are not ready for invading Taiwan. They are not ready to taking over Taiwan. The defense ministry know it. So they've been rejecting Xi Jinping's policy to be more aggressive on Taiwan issues. So these two ministries actually have such a huge internal conflict. And then in the internal struggle in the Communist Party, these policy disputes can easily be attacked using your personal scandal, your personal bad behaviors. And Xi Jinping was also very upset that the Chinese People's Liberation Army was very, very poorly prepared for the war, especially for the Rocky Force. And so Xi Jinping, if want to have the unification move, right, to take over Taiwan, but he would heavily rely on the Rocky Force because of the Taiwan Strait. So he would rely on China's ballistic missiles or other in the Rocky Force's arsenals in order to take over Taiwan, or at least put the pressure in Taiwan. But there are huge corruption inside the Rocky Forces. And so recently, now the news saying in September, 8 general levels commanders in the Rocky Force was actually arrested. So they are not able to really equip Chinese Rocky Forces in a professional way. There's so much corruption, so many missiles. They are actually testing the missiles last year, and 4 missiles. Only 2 were able to land near the target, and 2 was actually failed, and then the relic was found inside mainland China while they were actually targeting to South China Sea. So Xi Jinping was very upset on the situation of Chinese Rocky Forces. And so now the defense ministers was actually removed, and probably because of the corruption charges, at least on the surfaces. And then the former commander, the first commander of Rocky Force, and then the latest commander of the Rocky Force, as well as his 2 deputies, were all removed. So totally at least 8 top generals in the Chinese People's Liberation Army were removed. So it totally tells the whole world, actually, Chinese political situation is very unstable. And Xi Jinping is very scared that he cannot control the military. And now there are many reports indicating that Xi Jinping was very, very scared that any assassination may happen to himself. So he, even when he visit or go abroad for visit, when he come back, he was not there directly flying to Beijing. He may stop at Xinjiang, other place first. And so he was very scared that assassination can happen to himself. He's worried about his own safety, and he know inside, even in the Zhongnanhai compound, there are his enemy forces in there. And also, if he cannot control the military, he will quickly step down. So there are so many risks inside the People's Liberation Army. And this is the political instability, I think, is very obvious, even just from the 2 scandals.
Okay, so obviously what we got from that is the opaqueness of the Chinese power and struggles within that. It's very hard for us to understand what's really going on, right? But one thing that's really clear is that America is being invaded by a substance called fentanyl. and specifically with the precursor of fentanyl coming from China. Now, the U.S. government has tried to engage with China on that issue, but it seems like China hasn't really done much concrete on that, right? So, Sean, tell us a little bit more about how is fentanyl actually being used as a weapon by China?
Yeah, nowadays at least over 90% of the fentanyl in the United States come from China, or at least the precursors come from China, but they may be manufactured in Myanmar or in Mexico. So I think in the last three administrations of the United States, the leaders all rely on Chinese government to promise that they will collaborate on the anti-narcotic wars. And so, but this is a false hope. The Communist Party never really takes strong actions against the drug seizers, and they actually occasionally they may have an event, try to maybe like in Guangdong, other places may have like a campaign against the drug dealers. But most of the time, the Chinese government not very actively engaged, because any of these international engagement is about geopolitical power in the perspective of CCP. So if they want to gain some leverage from the United States, they can say, we want to collaborate with you. So for example, Xi Jinping in 2019, he actually also promised China will take stronger actions against the fentanyl. And so they did not really control the situation, because once the Chinese government on their document, they say we will ban fentanyl. So many of the drug dealers in China, they just do not sell it over the internet. They can quickly ship the precursors to Myanmar or even directly to Mexico. So it's very easy for them to divert attention, and also they can escape international monitoring of the situation. So I think the first mistake for the United States is really trusting the Chinese government. We're waiting for their promise, waiting for them to fulfill their promise to actually control the fentanyl pandemic, actually. So this is a huge mistake. And I think definitely the United States take stronger action, because now these drug dealers become so rampant, so aggressive. For Chinese chemical manufacturers inside China, there are so many companies, very, very audaciously telling the drug dealers, saying, we teach you how to make fentanyl precursors to fentanyls. If you buy from them, they will give you the recipe, how do you make it? And they can create all kinds of recipes. And the chemists inside China help these drug dealers to build up the manufacturing capacities. Now, even in Mexico, in Sinaloa, there are about 2,000 Chinese there. They are helping the drug dealers to make fentanyls. So this is entering from the back door of the United States, right? Especially when we have the southern border open. So there are so many fentanyl can come into the United States and killing over 110,000 Americans in year 2022. So it's a huge crisis. And if the source from China cannot be blocked, cannot be, severely cracked down, let's say in this way, and then the precursors will just be flooding the international society. So it's a huge problem.
Thank you, Sean. Now, Josh, I want to ask you about this, because we often hear this term. It's called the United Front, and it's actually Mao Zedong said it's one of the three magical weapons that he used to win the Civil War. So, can you just explain to us what it is and then the effects of the United Front?
How many of you heard about these Chinese police stations in America? I mean, I think a lot of people were really shocked when they heard that. China has police stations on American soil. And people were like, well, are they arresting people? Can they send them back to China? They've done it. In fact, they had a program for it. It's called Operation Fox Hunt. The CCP had agents on American soil, and they were either capturing or encouraging people to kill themselves, who the CCP was targeting, in terms of its anti-corruption campaigns. My job at Epoch Times, or my role as an investigative reporter, actually started by investigating these networks. That started in 2008, and the long story short of it was there were attacks against people in the Chinese community happening in Flushing, Queens. It was right ahead of the Beijing Olympics, and so the CCP was targeting religious groups. They were going after house Christians in China. They were arresting Tibetan Buddhists on the street. They were beating people. There were videos of Chinese police with monks' robes, like Tibetan Buddhist monks' robes. They were putting on the monks' robes and like throwing Molotov cocktails and stuff. They were doing this for optics. And then in the United States and in Europe and in all kinds of different countries, they had, in fact, several parts of the U.S., they had mobilized Chinese people on the ground in various Chinese communities who were also beating, threatening to kill, attacking, spitting on, you name it. Chinese Americans, Chinese French, Chinese Europeans of different countries. And so I was sent to investigate this. Over time, what I found was that the picture of this is beyond imagination. I've heard estimates. The number of Chinese spies active in America could be close to 1 million. A more conservative number would be about 400,000.
Sorry, that was in 2008?
That was 2008. Now, for a lot of people, it might be shocking, because we think spies like James Bond and stuff, And I can tell you, when I was investigating these networks, I remember talking to Chinese people like, that guy's a spy. I mean, not you, I'm just saying, hypothetically speaking, I've been pointing at this guy, and I'm like, that's not a spy. The guy is like, he's wearing like an undershirt. He looks like he hasn't showered for a week. I was like, that's not a spy. I know, I've watched James Bond and Mission Impossible. I know a spy when I see one. They're like, no, that's a spy. It's a Chinese spy. And sure enough, they were right. What the Chinese Communist Party was doing was what they call liaison work. It has two branches of its government. One is the United Front Work Department. The other is called the Overseas Chinese Affairs Office. They also work with the military through the liaison department, which works directly with the propaganda department. And what they do is they have soldiers, essentially, come to America, come to New York, come into your local community, and they will go to the Chinese consulate and be deployed to different parts. And they'll go to your elected representatives. They'll go to your city council members. They'll get into your, like finance clubs. They'll get to the gold meetings. They'll get to like your Christian groups. And they'll start to try to influence you. They'll say, hey, people have China wrong. They'll go to your local official and say, hey, you should come to China. You should come on a trip to China. We'll pay for it. You don't have to pay a penny for it. And you'll see that the American media, they're just afraid of China's rise. When they bring them to China, they have 5 methods of subverting them. They target moral flaws. It's like the devil's advocate type stuff. If you're greedy, they'll bribe you. If you're attached to lust, they'll drug you and make you sleep with an underage girl and film it. If you're attached to, like, for example, fame, a lot of times you have, like, for example, college professors go to China. They'll literally roll out a red carpet for them. They'll treat them like they're the biggest stars in the world. And they'll have kids asking them, you're so amazing. I'm sure you must be famous back in America. Do they recognize you? And of course the person's thinking, no, they don't recognize me in America, but they recognize me here. And through these methods, they slowly get them to buy into the CCP's agenda. Now, once they do that, they start getting control within politics. They start getting control over different representatives, from your local city council all the way up to the highest levels they can possibly reach. They'll go after family members, they'll go after business leaders, they'll go after everybody. And this is what the United Front does. It's called leadership capture. They capture the leadership of a country. They capture the leadership of organizations, of businesses, of universities, and they start having them do things that are in favor of the CCP or that enact the Chinese Communist Party's unconventional war systems. And that's drug warfare. That's culture warfare. That's putting Chinese influence in Hollywood. That's going after, on the note of drug warfare, it's worse than this. The Chinese Communist Party does the money laundering. That's through the Vancouver model. They launder the money for the drug cartels in Canada. They do it through the casinos. They call it the Vancouver model. The Chinese Communist Party does the money laundering. They supply the precursor chemicals. They supply the fentanyl and the synthetic drugs. The cartels we hear so much about, they are the foot soldiers of the Chinese Communist Party. And this is a war. This is a declared war. I'm not even exaggerating this. This is a declared war. In fact, the CCP calls it people's war. If you read, for example, Unrestricted warfare, which is from two Chinese colonels who are now in different high-level positions. They list drug warfare in there. And Mao Zedong actually modeled the drug warfare systems based on, of course, the British Opium Wars. He called it people's opium, people's heroin. And think about it. They can kill 100,000 Americans a year. How many Americans die in wars? If we went to war with that, how many Americans died in the longest war? Not that many. Not as many as been killed in a single year from fentanyl. How many Americans were killed in Vietnam? Not as many as have been killed by fentanyl in a single year. They are killing more of our children. They're killing more of our neighbors every single year using this. And even worse, what it does is it creates criminal networks. And so I talked about the tongs, I talked about the cartels. One of the things the United Front does is it goes to the criminal networks as well, because they go to Chinese organizations that run the Chinese mafia. The organization I investigated in New York is called Fujian. One of the main ones involved is called the Fujian American Association. Beneath that is the Fujian gang. They're one of the biggest mafias on the face of the planet. They're some of the biggest human traffickers on the face of the planet. In fact, there was one of the most famous human trafficking incidents. It was called the Golden Venture. Huge ship ran ashore off the coast of New York. That was them. That was the Fujian gang. They were the ones orchestrating some of these attacks. And so what happens when you have, for example, drugs? What happens when you have gun trafficking? Because they supply a lot of the guns to Mexico through Chinese manufacturer Norinco. What happens when you have these criminal networks? You have shipping channels. You have smuggling channels. You have corrupt officials. You have corrupt police. You have corrupt judges. And you can tap those networks for other things. This is how the CCP is waging war against the United States using these networks.
So, Josh, I want to follow up with that because it wasn't until this year and last year did we start to even hear about these police stations. The one that was arrested in New York, the two, and then in the UK there were British, British.
They went after one right around here.
Yeah, can you? So how come it takes so long for them to dig these out?
Not too far from here, they arrested a couple Chinese spies. Actually, were tied in with this. This is the difference because we used to not call them Chinese. We didn't call them Chinese police stations. The Chinese police station label was clever. It was a clever label some human rights organization came up with in terms of helping people understand what these things are. When I've been reporting on since 2008. In fact, some of the original government reports were heavily cited my articles. In fact, there was almost no reporting on it when I first started, and a lot of journalists. They're like, oh, great, I get the scoop. To me, it was horrifying. To me, it was scary to think that there was something so massive, and I could not find government reports on it. That there was what I would regard as the biggest threat to this country happening right under our noses in probably every single major, not even major city, even just your local communities all throughout the country. You hear bits and pieces of it. Chinese spies stealing corn seeds, in Kansas or whatever. Chinese spies targeting a local community center, Chinese spies going after people like in places you'd never think you'd ever hear Chinese spies going to. It's because they're all tied together. It's because it's being orchestrated. There's a centralized system for it. And so at the time, of course, we were calling it subversion. We were calling it Chinese front operations. We were calling it Chinese spy operations. But I think until people connected to these are police stations. They have a database, by the way, under the Overseas Chinese Affairs Office of every single Chinese American. Not only direct people from there, but even second and third generation. And so it could be that you are born in America, your mom's born in America, but your grandma came from China. They're going to have you on the database. And it's coming out now that people heard about this. Of course, Chinese system that just has every single person out of the Chinese social credit system. They include Americans on that now. When they're stealing health data through cyber attacks, when they're stealing school data through cyber attacks, even your biometric data, your DNA. Do you know a lot of those COVID test swabs are being run in Chinese labs? Even a lot of those ancestry, not ancestry website, but the ones you do to check your ancestry. Those are a lot of those, not all of them, but a lot of them run through Chinese labs. You know that our own military was warned to not do those because they're run out of Chinese labs? Why would that be a military threat? It's because they develop weapons off of them. They have databases on us, let alone even Chinese Americans. And when they target people, they go to this. Not even social networks. It's easy. If I was a Chinese spy and I wanted to breach any company in America, you know what I'd do? I'd jump on LinkedIn, I'd type in their company, and I'd map their entire employment structure. It's as simple as that. And then you can find the guy you want, maybe the IT guy who controls all the computer networks, and you jump on his Facebook page, and you can start talking to him. It's as simple as that.
I actually want to quickly jump in with a story. So in Canada, I believe it was the British Columbia University, this beautiful Chinese girl approaches this graduate student, tries to get a date with him, and then steals all his graduate studies passwords, steals the entire database for the research, and then never to be seen again. Josh, thank you for that. So, Kate, I want to jump to you because you've studied communism and socialism and the ideology for it. There's two major aspects that I think you'll be great at answering. The first is there's a long war against the students, the kids, the K-12 education system. And Congress, it seems some of them at least, are doing the first step, which is asking questions about it. So Senator Kramer and his Republican colleagues apparently are demanding an investigation into CCP influences in the K-12 system. Now, this is very broad because America as a whole, the education system is quite complex. But why would the communists want to get into the education system, want to influence the K-12 system?
Why would they want to influence education? Well, if you go back as far as, say, Lenin in Soviet Russia in the 1920s, he said, if you give me, don't quote me on this, but he said, if you give me the kids for 4 years, I'll plant a seed that can't be removed. Did I get that right? I think I was pretty close, right? Yeah, close enough. So you think about that. Was he wrong? That in 4 years you can influence a child if you're working with them every single day as an educator or as a parent every day? What can you put into that kid's head in 4 years? Any parents out there, I'm a mother, I know what you can get into a kid every day. So education is fundamental to what they, to anyone that is trying to cause harm. So for a nation, we've talked about the drugs, we've talked about the physical, and thinking about spies and trying to steal data and things like that. Well, then there's that. The indoctrination is the education part, and that happens a lot through the schools. It also happens through social media. It happens through all forms of media, and that's something that the communists have just known for 100 years or more. So, for us to think that this is a new strategy, it's not. It's old, and it's been honed, and it's very effective. So we do have to wake up to it. And you mentioned about, so the schools specifically, K-12 schools, just this year there was a hearing from the Education and Workforce Committee, and they were saying, in the US government, and they were saying that there's more than 500 US schools are working with the Chinese government for, they have Confucius classrooms or Confucius centers. And they are directly tied to the Chinese Communist Party, who is using them to infiltrate the schools and the minds of our next generation. So, and it is that serious. It's not like they're just influencing the schools and some policies. It is influencing the next generation of this country and therefore the world. So, why are they waking up to it now? Well, it's a bit late. It's like what you were saying in Flushing, right? In 2008, people have been trying to raise awareness about the Confucius Institutes being dangerous and really impeding our academic freedom, our ability to have kids learn without censorship and to learn an accurate reflection of history, not the Chinese Communist Party reflection of history, which is completely inaccurate and not taught to their own citizens. We don't want that here, right? So that's where they've been doing this for more than 10 years. We've been aware of these Confucius Institutes. So it's about time that the US government is recognizing that. I commend them for that. I'm glad they're doing it. But we really need to jump on that because it is that serious and it is that widespread. And note that those 500 plus schools, many of them are very strategically based near military bases. How convenient. You get the kids, you get access to all the families there, and those kids, their parents are working at these military bases quite often. Then you start to influence the kids. You start to tell them the Chinese Communist Party view of history. It's quite possible that those children will go and work in those military bases in the future. So the CCP is looking at the long goal. It's not a short-term goal. And that's where if you look at the big picture, that's where education is absolutely vital, because you change the future. You don't just change the newsfeed now, you change the future through education.
Well, so it kind of makes sense, because if you talk about the long game, we're here for decades to try to change a whole generation of students, right? K to 12. But then, I mean, how do you... So you're basically trying to fundamentally change their understanding or perception of communism or the CCP, for example. But, I mean, I assume that many of you, maybe even before the Trump trade wars, before the pandemic, you might not have cared that much about China, or maybe your perception of China was that it was a friendly country. So this seems like it's also a long-term cognitive shift that it's done to us to assume that China is nice. Can you kind of explain that? How does communism cognitively change somebody?
Well, it's a worldview. What is your worldview? What do you care about? And how do you look at how do you look at a country? How do you look at your social unit, your family unit, and in a bigger scale? The communist view of that is very specific, and the worldview that they want us to have is their worldview. Whereas coming from a country such as America, where my accent is Australian, so I wasn't born and raised here, but I do love and respect this great country. And so coming from this country as something founded as one nation under God, with a constitution, throwing off the monarchy, which no other country has ever done before, it's a completely different worldview. So for Americans to accept a communist, a Chinese communist view, a Soviet communist, any kind of communist worldview, it's a big shift, and it takes time. And they knew that. It's not like, say, in Soviet Russia, where they experimented in the 1920s and just violently overthrew everything and said, you must think this way, we were going into the Gulag slave labor camps. It takes time, and they know that with America it takes time. This is a special country, and that's in our advantage as long as we wake up to it, I think.
All right, and last but not least, Chris, I understand you did a lot of research into how the churches or the religious denominations are being influenced in America. Can you give us the overview of the situation? Because it's such a big, vast network of systems, and different places have different uniqueness. So how does it kind of go with communism?
Yeah, thank you, David. And I want to apologize when I first started here. Josh and David, they both have day shows, so I brought some notes. So one thing that I wanted to talk about, just like Josh was saying, was influence operations. And churches fundamentally are places where people are informed of their values. That's where people get their moral compass from. That's where people are brought up to know what's right and wrong. So in China, if you're not aware, the 5 denominations are run by the government. The Communist Party of China, if you're a Protestant Christian, if you're Catholic, if you're Buddhist, you're actually a part of a church which is supervised by the Communist Party. Now that's very significant for people in China, but you might ask yourself, how does it affect me in America? I'm not getting my religious examinations, I'm not listening to China. Well, actually, the Chinese Communist Party knows the value of religion. They know that people are formed in faith, and in order to distance people from God, because they have this policy called strike and pull out, where they influence religious groups, and then they pull out. They bring them out. They bring them into the Communist Party. They bring them out of faith in God. In order to influence these people, they actually infiltrate religious groups. They will actually join seminaries, they will join church groups, and they will ascend the hierarchies of these organizations. And then they will go on to enact change which benefits them, even in America. So a good example of this is something that I stumbled upon recently. You had, for a number of years, and probably still going on, Chinese Bible exhibitions in the United States. Now, this is interesting. So if you're not aware, in China, the Bible is edited by the Chinese Communist Party. A good example of this is in John chapter 7 and 8, you have the story of Jesus who is going along and he sees a woman who's found guilty of adultery, and she's about to be stoned. And instead of her getting stoned, Jesus intervenes. And what does he say? Let ye, you know what? Exactly. So in the Chinese Communist version, Jesus himself tells the religious authorities to leave, then he himself stones the woman because she was not faithful to the law. And then he looks out very dramatically and says, I'm a sinner too. Now, if you know anything about Christianity, you know how Jesus being a sinner too is a very big problem. But in China, they're not so interested in getting Christianity right. They have a program which was launched in 2018, which is the Sinicization, the China, making Christianity like China. And the largest Protestant body there was behind all of this. Actually, it was the Chinese Communist Party who's on top of them who was behind all of this. So they came up with their own edited version of the Bible. And this Bible is a Chinese Bible. It is not a Christian Bible. It conforms to various aspects of socialism and Chinese thought and other stuff that the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party thinks is important for people to know. And they'll take the Bible where they don't edit it directly. They'll also put little annotations in there to remind people of the right way to think. So they had these Chinese Bible exhibits like I was talking about. And it's interesting. I don't know if many of you are familiar with the United Church of Christ. It's a very large mainline denomination. They have one over here on Main Street in Poughkeepsie. They actually have an organization called Global Ministries. And this is a partnership mission group with the United Church of Christ, and it's also with the Church of Christ, the Church of God in Christ. And the point of this group is to basically go out into the global space and to, they say, be a missionary group that's bringing Christianity abroad. Well, I found that some ministers who are at the executive level in this organization were involved with various people in the local churches and also in the federal government, even Jimmy Carter. They were focused on bringing Chinese exhibitions to America so that we can have a church-to-church exchange. So the Chinese churches can tell the American churches how things really are in China. And if you know anything about Christianity in China, you know that there's tremendous religious persecution in China. Just recently, there was a pastor who put some quotations from the Bible on COVID masks, and he was distributing them. He was arrested, put in jail. You have people who hand out audio Bibles. They're never seen again. I mean, there's horrendous religious persecution going on, not only to Christians, but also to Muslims, Jews, Falun Gong practitioners. You've probably heard of the Uyghurs in the concentration camps. So I just want to read this to you, because I thought this was a really amazing example of how these groups work. So this is put out by the press office of this American-based church, and it's titled The Bible Ministry Exhibition of Church in China, And it's written almost like a letter to the congregation. So it says, when I speak to Americans about the church in China, I find there is a lot of misinformation. Many Americans do not even know that there are churches in China. While it is true for a time Chinese churches and other religions were persecuted, much has changed. Not only are there active churches in China, but the churches in China are growing at a rate of 2 new churches every 3 days. Perhaps you know someone who has donated money for Bibles in China. Some people still believe that the Bible in China is not available. Or if it is, they wonder if it contains a communist version. The truth is, over 40 million Bibles have been printed in China at $1.50 each. And they're printed on government printing presses. Would you like to know more about Christianity in China? We invite you to come and see. The Bible Ministry Exhibition of the Church of China will be held in Los Angeles, Atlanta, and right here in New York, where you can come. And actually, members of your church group are taking an active part in these events. Join reverends, I'll bleep it out, and reverend general ministers, blah, 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 come on down. So yeah, they're organizing these groups, and churches are actually taking them in. They're taking them in with their erroneous Bible. It's not the Bible. It's a fake communist version of the Bible. They're taking them in not only to do that, but also to instruct people in churches that actually China is doing all right, and don't worry about how the situation is over there. And the church leaders, really, you should see what we're doing. We're making great progress. There was persecution a few years ago, but we've taken care of that. So just to give you a look at where these things were held, so you have one in Los Angeles that was done at a non-denominational church. You have another, a Baptist church in Atlanta. And then you have the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City. That's a very famous Episcopal church, if anyone knows about that. That's a very big church, very powerful church in the U.S. This was held in Washington, too, at a Methodist church by the UMC, and then, unfortunately, in Charlotte, North Carolina, at the Billy Graham Association Library. So, yeah, it's getting everywhere, and it's disgusting. And I have some more notes here. Let me pull something out here. So the organization which is in control of churches in China is called the Three Self Christian Patriotic Movement. And the Three Self, it's a very long name, but it actually came from a much longer name. And that name was Oppose America, Aid Korea, Three Self Reform Movement. So that was the mother, the brainchild of Protestant churches in China. And all Protestant Christians in China, be they Lutherans, Baptists, Methodists, anything, Episcopalians, they're all a part of this organization, which is led by the National Religious Affairs Administration. And the National Religious Affairs Administration is a part of the United Front Work Department. They were absorbed in 2018. So, and who runs that, Josh?
Chinese Communist Party.
Correct. So that's how it's happening. That's how it's happening right here in America. I could also mention that, in 2015, there's the BAC, which is their Buddhist association. They have this a congress every so often at their 9th National Congress. They said that we have a mission here, and we need to bring Chinese Buddhism out of China to tell the Chinese story well. So they're not just doing it with Christianity. They're doing it with all large denominations. It works well for them because there's a lot of Buddhists in China, certainly more Buddhists than there are Christians. And they have an agenda here. The agenda is to influence the narrative of how religion goes on in China and to influence how Americans conduct their faith and how they think about religion in China and how they think about what's going on in the world more broadly. Because if you warm someone's heart and soul up to China domestically, it's it. I mean, if you can't see that there's a problem here, that there's an organization which is going on, and it's trying to get your church to sponsor talks where they'll parade around a fake Bible, something needs to be done. The last point I'll leave here is I want to talk about how the Three Self Patriotic Movement and the Chinese Christian Council, the groups that oversee Christianity in China, what exactly does it say about their Bible? So the Bible with the annotations, they promote the core values of socialism. They believe that Christianity should adapt to China, not the other way around. And they're influenced in embracing the support of the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party. Imagine reading that in your Bible. You're going through, Timothy, and he's, wait a minute, what is Paul saying here? So So it's sick, and it's not just happening with Protestant Christians. We know it's happening with what's going on with the Catholic Church in China, the LDS Church, the Mormons. So if I could say one thing that you could take home here, talk to your pastor, write a letter to your bishop or to whoever's in charge of your church. Make sure that this stuff doesn't get involved in your church.
Wow, Chris, that was very eye-opening. Thank you very much. So before we open up to the floor for everyone to ask questions, I just want to double-check how many mics we have. We have one here. We have a mic. One more, maybe? Two? Just one? Okay, so if we can just get someone to pass it around to people. And then just one last thing. We'll try to keep them, if you are to ask a question, just try to keep it as a question. We have many people who may have questions to ask. If you want to offer a comment, maybe you can wait till the end of the Q&A session. Okay. Other than that, we'll open up the floor now for questions. You can either direct it to someone or just throw it out, and we'll pick somebody to answer it for you. Just raise your hand. Yes. Go ahead.
I'm interested to know the extent to which the FBI know that these people are in this country killing people.
Well, it's hard to say how much they know. They have their problems too, unfortunately. Let's put it that way. You know, one of the problems you have with leadership capture is that, in my personal opinion, you unfortunately have a lot of heads of our different government branches have also been subverted in some way. Sometimes it's not like they're working as spies. You know, I think this is where I think there's a misunderstanding. If you think subverted, if you think that someone has been subverted by the CCP and you accuse them of it, they're like, hey, you know, the guy was just my driver for 30 years. You know, my son just made $1 billion deal with them. You know, right? Okay, I'm sorry. You know, people think, oh, they're working for China. It's usually not. There's a spectrum. Oftentimes, it's something very minor. One thing I was shocked by is I've actually lectured twice at the Air Force Air Academy, and one thing was told to me by officers in our own military. They get these teachers who come in, and they've of course been educated through in China. They're China experts. Of course, you're going to listen to them, right? You have the top China advisors who've studied in China for 50 years. They're the top guys in the world. And they've been educated on the Chinese narrative. Not Chinese, I should separate the Chinese Communist Party's narrative. Anytime you talk to these people, they tell you about the century of humiliation. They're telling you CCP narratives. It's basically the way the CCP's excuse on why they think it's okay to, one, carry out complete warfare on the entire world, and two, on why you can't criticize them for it. They say, oh, it hurts the Chinese people's feelings when you criticize us for spreading COVID around the world. It's obviously racist if you talk about COVID coming from a Chinese laboratory. How dare you? And it's ways of stopping the conversation, essentially. And so you have a lot of elected officials. Maybe they're not working as Chinese spies. They're not taking an envelope of money under their desk or something like that. But they've been educated on this worldview. And so they're interpreting things through that narrative. I can say, though, that the FBI they've actually done some great arrests. In fact, the arrests of the Chinese spies right around here that took place, I read the charges. You even had Merrick Garland sign off on it. You had the head of the agency sign off. And they normally don't do that. I can say it's interesting. Even the Biden administration has kept in place a lot of Trump's tariffs on China and stuff. And so I do think that during COVID, especially, there was a waking up, where a lot of officials who had bought into these narratives, they started even Australia, India, Germany, of all places. A lot of them started waking up to these things, and they started recognizing, oh, these people are not what I thought they were. The Chinese Communist Party. And so even those who have been influenced, they're starting to kind of wake up, I think.
To add a little bit, inside FBI, there used to be a China project. So I think Christopher Wray once said, if FBI, they couldn't catch up the pace, how many new Chinese spy cases they establish every day. So of course, it's overloaded because CCP using a very unique strategy. Basically, they can force any Chinese who are going abroad to pledge their loyalty to the nation. They call it nation, but basically pledge loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party. So they encourage the Chinese, you can say, new immigrants in the United States to provide information, to collect information for the government, for the sake of the, for the sake of the Chinese countries. So many Chinese people fall into this trap, and they, maybe involuntarily become, like spies. And so this unique strategy, I don't think FBI find a way to handle this right now. And so, of course, they are genuine spies from the CCP. They are in behind control. Many of these become like informants for the real spies. So how do FBI handle this kind of situation? And so I think you need a whole government approach in order to contain these situations.
To add, sorry, just one more point on that is I think with the current state of our politics is that we often forget that we have representatives that represent us. And since COVID, so many people are awake to the threat from the CCP. I myself have been involved in some seminars like this pre-COVID, and we didn't get such a big crowd. So the fact that you guys are out here, there's television live streaming this event, and people are watching it, the representatives, our government representatives, have to pay attention. So I think that's also a big part of the shift, why they are doing something about it to some extent, to more extent than before, is because we're paying attention. So it's, with politics, it's too often that we just think big government has to solve our problems for us. But really, with the way America is supposed to operate, we, the people, hold the power, right? So that's where we have to remember that it's not up to us to just forfeit, the power of decision making and all of that. Who's going to solve this problem? Well, we have to take some responsibility too, and I think people are, and that's why we're also seeing shifts in our representatives because they can't ignore us.
Just real quick to correct myself, I meant to say sanctions, not tariffs. That's all.
I also want to add a little bit, since the event is actually organized, also co-sponsored by Quitting CCP global centers, right? So actually, kind of echo your point. So many Chinese people also waking up, whether it's inside China or outside China. So many people joined the campaign to quit the Chinese Communist Party or its affiliated organization or youth organization. So now the number already reached over 400 million. And so many Chinese people are actually waking up. And in the past, in China, maybe 10 or 20 years ago, you dare not to criticize CCP in the public. Now everybody can curse CCP. Everybody can curse Xi Jinping. So the credit of the CCP is totally bankrupted. And probably their bank credit will also, financial credit will bankrupt. So, but the real issue is that nobody really believes in the Communist Party. So, but they just have the totalitarian control system still in working, but nobody really following the Communist Party.
Okay, there was a gentleman in the back there who had a question, or maybe we go to the.
Yeah, we're recycling.
Okay.
So it seems to me that what you're saying is that China is not just spreading viruses literally, but also figuratively as well. And in order for a virus to cause an infection, it needs a receptor, however, so that it could spread. And so my question is, what organizations here in the U.S., either political or social, are giving this CCP threat a foothold?
Josh, you want to talk about it?
I would say that if we were to make a list of all of them, you'd probably feel sick to your stomach. I would say there's probably not a single one that has not been influenced in some way. Look, they're going after like kindergartens. You know what I mean? They're going after your kids like elementary school, let alone government offices and even businesses.
But are there specific individuals that what about Eric
Swalwell, for example, sleeping with spies and stuff like that? Are there specific individuals that are more responsible than others?
Well, without a doubt. I mean, you can look at the ones who are, let's say, trying to cover up for the CCP, the ones making deals with the CCP, and the ones selling out their interest with the CCP. You know what I mean? You can do the math now. But There are quite a few, and a lot of it comes through the investment system. A lot of it's through the financial institutions, and then a lot of the big corporations. They also lobby our government on behalf of the CCP. The CCP can't lobby our government directly, and so they do it through a lot of the big corporations. And this is known. They do it openly, actually.
Yeah, also, kind of remind what Joshua said earlier about the data collection about American people. So now they can specifically target some of the election candidates, right? So even, for example, one election in Virginia, the Democratic Party actually had a database analyzed by a group inside Wuhan in China to help them figure out the demographic situations in Virginia and how do you campaign, how do you win the district elections. So the data was actually analyzed in China. And so they know who was the candidate. They can selectively support which candidate they want to, like long-term investment in this.
Okay. Hi. Thank you for coming. So first of all, a couple questions. First of all, how do you manage the inevitable scrutiny and attention that I'm sure you're under from the CCP as your organization and others like yours? Secondly, what do people in China, the general public, think about the origin of COVID? And thirdly, what do you believe is the truth about Xi Jinping and Trump, as some people believe that he has some power with Xi Jinping, some influence to be not exploited, but utilized in a productive way for America? So those are my three questions.
So just before you guys answer, I think Mila has some announcements. Oh, we're okay.
I think the first question I want to answer because we are the sponsor of the seminar, and honestly, we prepared the death threat we received before the first seminar we held. And how do we face the stress and pressure? I think, to me personally, I believe a lot of people with me want the fight against communism is not a political fight. It is a spiritual fight. And it is, we are not here for politics, for any personal gains. We are here to prevent the specter of communism from bringing more people to hell. That's real. It's not figuratively speaking. I forgot your second question.
The second question is about the COVID, how Chinese people view.
Yeah, I'll leave the third question for the panel, but I want to answer the second question. We don't call, I know Trump calls the virus as the China virus. I'm Chinese. We call it the CCP virus. And I hope you all call it, please, the CCP virus. And I want to add a little bit about the question prior. How do they have a foothold? The Chinese government has laid out such systematic groundwork, especially among the Chinese communities, through media, through personal, a lot of personal relationships. They've developed many associations. They've beaten up people, American citizens, right in American soil. If you would go to Flushing, even in some parades, the Chinese New Year parades, to my personal astonishment, they were waving China flags, no American flags for the last many years. Sorry.
Thank you. Third question, I think it was about Trump and Xi Jinping.
So the big narrative of that is that Trump had, I think, a hotel deal that fell through, as far as I know. They were discussing it. it's like Elon Musk. He has, of course, Tesla in China, but he's not in bed with them. So, I mean, yeah, it's not.
I didn't mean it as not being in bed. More like there's a sense, or there's some narrative that he has the goods on a lot of leaders across the world, including some sort of influence with Xi Jinping in a positive way, like an effective way. That's not that he's compromised.
Oh.
He has control.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can tell you Xi Jinping, it was looking, this is complicated. I'll say it very briefly, though. I could do like a 5-hour thing on this. There's a lot of infighting in China, and the CCP works like a blood cult. You have to get blood on your hands to rise through the ranks, because it's everybody's guilty. They're all a bunch of genocidal, maniacs, basically. You know what I mean? That's what political correctness is. It comes from Mao Zedong, I believe, 1967. The idea of political correctness, it's a political moral system. If you want to rise through the ranks, they don't have elections. It's not like you cast your, they do kind of have elections. You rise through the ranks by getting blood on your hands. And if you don't have blood on your hands, you're a threat. You are a threat to the other people in the cult. The CCP is a blood cult. And Xi Jinping came in through some weird systems, kind of backdoors. He didn't get involved directly in the persecution of Falun Gong initially, which was essentially the blood pact that Jiang Zemin had, who was 2 leaders before. And so they had infighting. Xi Jinping looked like he was not going to get involved and was allegedly thinking about dissolving the CCP. It looks like he's flipped at this point. It looks like CCP. It looks at this point like he's fully on board with communism and the CCP model.
I also want to add a little bit. Actually, inside China, many Chinese people regarding Xi Jinping as a great accelerator for CCP's disintegration. He's a great accelerator. Or in other words, Xi Jinping is out of control. He's bringing down the Communist Party. And so even the beginning question you talk about the scandal in CCP is because Xi Jinping become the lifetime chairman, right? So he want to use all his power to maintain his political position. So in that kind of maniac situations, he gradually loses his own sense, and he broke all the rules. Actually, whether it's hidden rule or a general rule under the CCP organizations, right? So in the past, the CCP's leadership done complete wipe out the opponents. Political influential people inside the Politburo committees, standing committee. But now Xi Jinping take all the other opponents out. He himself control all these ones. And now he can wipe out the huge purge in the military sectors. This never happened in the CCP history before. Never happened in this scale before. So he's breaking all the rules. He just wants to secure his power. So I don't think right now President Trump can actually have a positive influence on Xi Jinping because Xi Jinping himself is already out of control.
Okay, any other? Go ahead. Yep. The mic's in the back. Okay, I guess he'll control who goes to the question next.
I have 2 points to make actually, so I'm going to make the first point and then the second one. The first is that the U.S. government should actually stop recognizing the Chinese territory as it is today, because back in the 1950s, in the post-World War era, in the modern era, they actually illegally went and occupied not just Tibet, but East Turkmenistan and Manchuria and Inner Mongolia, and those are all illegal occupations by the Chinese, CCP, and not just that, they are sending their men over there to forcefully marry the women and make them Han dynasty related. So they are, changing their blood that way, and so this is like totally outrageous. Nobody can stand it. I fail to understand why, all the world governments have not there has been, they've been seeing it, but they should totally disown this. I mean,
sorry. Are you able to frame your second point into a question? That way, because we can get some discussion that way.
Yeah, the second is if the private companies in China, how much tax money do they pay to the CCP government? Because today, right now, right here, we can decide against this threat to stop buying those Chinese products, return them. Because unless you will return them, they will think that you are still in favor of them. Unless you will return them, and so that way you can cut down the taxes that are being paid to the CCP.
So, anyone want to answer that? So, how does the Chinese companies and I guess the relationship with the CCP works in terms of paying them taxes and whatnot?
I can comment on this. I don't want to comment too much. I talk too much. But look, if you want to see the biggest show, that we're being sold a massive sham with half the political, half the companies in this entire country. Look at their business with China. Look, we have Nike lecturing us about slavery. They're using slave labor in China. Most of the garment industry uses slave labor in China. They're trying to preach to us about slavery 100 years ago. They're using slaves as we speak in China. They talk to us about genocide. They're engaged with a genocidal regime that is carrying out genocide as we speak, including foreign invasion, and they want to talk about all this human rights stuff. They're backing the CCP as it carries out cultural genocide in Tibet. They're backing the CCP as it has Muslim slave camps. They're backing the CCP as it's harvesting the organs from living Falun Gong practitioners. And they're trying to lecture us about, morals or progressiveness. It's a bunch of nonsense. And that goes for every single financial institution involved with the CCP. That goes for the Paris Climate Accord that's lecturing us about greenhouse gases, and they do nothing to restrain the CCP. We're being sold a giant sham. And thank you for bringing that up, because that really points out the hypocrisy in a lot of it.
Okay.
Yeah, I like to say, we all talk about follow the money, because when you follow the money, you see where it leads, and there's often a blood trail going back with that. But I like to say follow your money, because every dollar you spend, you're voting with your dollar, and that's what's really important these days. That's your vote. So I tell my kids, do you really want to buy that brand? Do you know what? I'm just not going to pay for that. If you want to spend your money on that, you save up for that, and I'll tell you a bit about that company and what they're doing, their connections with China. I think if we start talking like that's the things that we can do, and again, that will lead back to our representatives, where they're going to have to pay more attention. So I agree with your point, thank you, and I think, follow your money and vote with your dollar.
Well, just a reminder to check your retirement investment, because BlackRock was recently just told by the CCP to recite Chinese socialism, basically. But I want to throw this out there because we mentioned this. Doesn't the Chinese Communist Party put a communist office type of thing in every company anyways? So, I think, I don't know if I understand this correctly, but technically they own every company to begin with.
Think of a parasite. Actually, I really like the gentleman's analogy talking about a virus, and you need a receptor for it to get in. I think it's a really easy way for people in America, for us here, to understand it, because we experienced COVID. But inside China, and everywhere, but in China, it's a parasite, essentially.
They can mutate it too.
They can mutate it. You don't need. In society, you don't need a Communist Party member as part of your hospital, for example. But there's a Communist Party member, not just in the head of the hospital, but in the heart department, in the urology, in every department will have a Communist Party member, and because they put politics first, above healthcare, above God, above everything, and so that's where you have everything. It's not needed at all.
I feel like we have to talk about kind of the big picture here. I think Chris can talk about this too. Communism is a cult. It is a satanic cult. And I'm not saying that just figuratively. It's rooted in Gnostic beliefs. Marx and Hegel, and they were all a bunch of satanic cultists. I'm not even calling them names. They were literally in that stuff. And the whole idea is this war on God. Communism is about struggle, and it's about atheism. And if you understand that, you'll understand everything they're doing. Why was it that the Pope used to excommunicate communists? It's because of this. It was because of dialectical materialism. It's because he said it sharpens the antagonisms between people as its mode of operations. It tries to take people, divide them into groups, and then pit them against each other. Because it ties with this sick idea they have of social struggle. Because it ties into Hegel, which was the main, one of the main ideological theories at the time of Marx. Struggle leads forward. It was a theory on social evolution, progressivism. That if you want to speed up social evolution while struggling, survival of the fittest, social Darwinism, you need to increase the struggle and survival of the fittest. Through creating famines and genocides and campaigns where people fight against each other. Whether it's the bourgeois, the proletariat, whether it's the kulaks and the poor farmers, whether it's the educated people and the poor farmers in Cambodia. Whether it's, for example, the Nazis turning people against the Jews, every single, which is again National Socialism, by the way, every single area. Right now, they're trying to divide people by gender, by race. In America, they're doing this. This is how it works. This is how it works in every single country, in every single campaign, and people. I think people see through it now, but. This is what socialism is. Communism is the belief, it's the cult, it's the religion. Socialism is the form it takes in practice. This is what it does. And so, it's rooted in Gnosticism. Maybe Chris could talk about some of this too.
Chris, please.
But it's literally a cult. And if you understand why they want to destroy Christianity and just so happens in every country they go to, they try to kill the religious believers, it's because you are a threat to them. The belief in God is a threat to them. They're a humanist cult. They believe in remaking mankind and the world in the image of man rather than the image of God, and they want to overthrow the God-run world. That is the basis of communism.
Yeah, so if you go back to the beginning there, Marx himself used to write love letters to Satan, poetry. This is not like, how could I say it, like a poetic expression or something. This is a literal thing, as people are satanic. When Josh says that it's a satanic cult, it's a satanic cult. That's what it is. In Russia, the former Soviet Union, they actually created their own communist religion, and they called it Marxist-Leninist scientific atheism. And this was a religious group, and they had a youth chapter, which I guess is like Sunday school, and they would do various tasks. And then they would have temples of their scientific atheism, their religion. What would they do in these temples? Well, first they would take a church, and then they would strip it of all its iconography. In Russia, if you've ever seen these Russian Orthodox churches, they're very beautiful. They have images of heaven. They have images of saints, of God. They would throw all that out. First, they might turn it into a public restroom for a while. Then they would put in various museum exhibitions. So they would put in like a priest that they killed the week before, dead, in the center of the building. You can learn about God. See? It didn't help him. So the level of evil that these people are motivated by, it can only be explained in terms of down to the dirt Satanism. That's what it is. There's nothing short of it. When you put clergy members, you submerge them in frozen lakes in Siberia. When you take Falun Gong practitioners and you, while they're alive, take out their hearts. If you even think about what they did to the medical industry, look at in Russia and Soviet Union, they had something called sluggish schizophrenia. Sluggish schizophrenia. Well, what is that? That was a medical diagnosis that psychiatrists were giving patients who expressed the disorder of religion. They were sluggish schizophrenics. What does that mean? Well, they're behaving very strangely. They believe in this God thing. Well, what did they do with these people? There's a famous story of these monks who lived in this monastery, very remote monastery in Russia. They were focused on cultivating a relationship with God. First, these psychiatrists came in. They threw all the monks in the monastery. They locked them up because they were, obviously they were possessed. by sluggish schizophrenia. But then they arrested various leaders of the churches. These were all the bishops, the archbishops, the members of the Synod of the Russian Orthodox Church. These are the top-level people. They threw them in there in all these different insane asylums which they created. And they distanced the leadership of the church from the people. The church went underground. It became something that you whispered about. Public religion didn't exist. They had churches still in Russia. There was nominally, they still had a Russian Orthodox Church there. They still had religion. But those institutions were infiltrated by the Communist Party members. That was not Christianity. That was communism that you were going to learn. And what are those people going to tell you? Well, they're going to tell you the scientific atheist stuff, because that's what the new religion is. So yes, and don't for a minute think that was 100 years ago in Russia, where my family came from. Don't think that was just there and that's not going to happen. When you see the present organ harvesting in China of Falun Gong practitioners and putting religious believers in Xinjiang in concentration camps and working them to death. Don't think that's over there, that happens in these America is just as susceptible to communism as any other nation. And although that it was founded by these principles of belief in God, we said the Pledge of Allegiance earlier. I mean, one nation under God, even though we have that, and thank God we still do. There are. I showed you there are attempts to change that. So we need to be very vigilant here.
Thank you, Chris.
We have time for one more question. Please keep it relatively short. Thank you.
Since we know China has mostly propaganda coming out of it, there was rumors that there were these crematoriums that were burning up millions of COVID victims. Is there any data that says was that propaganda to make it look like they were affected or not affected? How do we know what? Assuming it's a bioweapon, was it geared to not killing the population as you would think? Was there any truth to these crematorium things where hundreds of thousands of people died and they were just hiding them? How was China actually affected?
So I think the gentleman, if I understand correctly, he's saying we saw videos of the crematoriums in the latest outbreak with COVID. Is that real? What's the real number? What's the real number?
Yeah, the real number, of course, is very hard to have a clear prediction. But even last month, there were reports actually from scientific journals actually indicating that the official Chinese gun data is totally underreported, and at least they're just based on 3 universities from the report, from Tsinghua University, from Beijing University as well, one university in Harbin. Just from the 3 universities' data, they collect the data about obituaries. Many of the scholars died in the university, right? And they use a sample and then export it to the nationwide, and they said Chinese gun at least underreported 2 million people dying. This is one example, but actually, if you check, counting the how many incinerators that burning, people died during last year from November all the way to February, and so by a simple calculation, it can be about 50 million people underestimated for the deaths just based on the calculation. Right? But if you look at the whole 3 years of the COVID period, how many Chinese people died? We don't even have any idea how many people died in Wuhan from the beginning of the outbreak. So Chinese government just keep lying about it. But one clear indication that the Chinese population has severely shrunk during the last 3 years is that Chinese government, first time this year, they acknowledge the Chinese population has a shrinking. And in the past, they always saying the Chinese population is still about 1.4 billion, is a huge market. But now, actually, many estimates say China probably only have about 1 billion people. And so there were a huge amount of Chinese people probably died during the last 3-4 years. And also, another indication is how many kindergartens being shut down in China now. The very low birth rate as well as so many people die in this process. So the population size severely shrink. And so I think the reality is that the international society is to look at China population situation in a completely different view. Chinese government lying about it for the last 3-4 years, just like they lied about the China's GDP. Every year they boosted this number. If you keep boosting this number, every year for 20 years. Imagine how big the lie is, right? Every year you just need to add maybe additional 2%, exactly the number. So after 20 years, almost 1/3 of your GDP is just in a digit. It's a fake number.
Okay, Mila, do you have one more?
No more questions.
Okay.
But we do have. Let's just thank all of the amazing panelists for this wonderful discussion. We feel like it's not enough. Thank you. And we have prepared a video. Ding can play for us. First the audio and then the video.
All right. This is a representative of the Chinese Communist Party. We hear you have been talking shit. We at the Chinese Communist Party have a particular set of skills. We will cook you a great chicken curry, and then we will find you, and we will kill you. Meet at 7 p.m. at your own danger. Goodbye.
This was the message we received. No, the next one is I want to explain the audio we just received. We received that on our phone for advertising our first Wake Up to the CCP Threat seminar last year before July the 20th, 2022. We engaged our local police in Mount Hope, the local government very supportive. The supervisor came, the council people came, the local police guarded our seminar, and we also reported to FBI. We ended up having a wonderful event, and a lot of brave people came to join the seminar as well. Okay, the next one is from Global Service Center for Quitting the CCP. Dr. Xiang just mentioned that the Chinese people are waking up too. They are denouncing the Communist Party just to say, I quit, because they force people to join in China as Communist Party members from elementary school to middle school to adults. If you don't join the party, you don't get anything. So now we offered the Global Service Center for Quitting the CCP has offered the certificates and making phone calls to people in China and the Chinese people, and also here for them who have joined the party to register to denounce the party. So, Ding, go ahead. Maybe slightly louder.
We urge Chinese people to continue their courageous struggle for freedom from the communist regime. And we want them to know we are with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And please don't just leave. You can leave at 9. You can meet the panelists and chat with them. You can't bring them home, but you can share the online live stream. You can bring the memories. And you can also bring that amazing books, very in-depth, a panel of very outstanding scholars. They've done very in-depth research, and those books are amazing. They are a great resource with many, many evidence and details. It's called How the Specter of Communism is Ruling the World. And you will find out how the Hollywood, the media, the government, the church, the leadership of the church, the school boards, the union leaders, it gives you all that history and the details. Very compelling. Thank you all. Thank you all so much. Thank you again.
Thank you guys so much for coming.
So let's hear a good round of applause for all of our panelists, Mila, and everyone else. We do have to be out of here by 9. One of the things that we do is we get the place for free, but we try to collect a little collection for the janitor that cleans up and closes up tonight. So if you could spare $1 or $2, that'd be great, and then we just give it to our janitor.
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States. I thank you for what you've done. I thank you for allowing us to hear. And I think when I was in January 6th, it was the Chinese people that were there on the streets on January 6th asking for petitions. And I said, look there's nobody else there. And these Chinese people that are part of America are asking for petitions. And you, as Americans, we need to start to fight, and we need to believe in God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Because it's not us, it's God who's going to step in, because he knows what he has done for this nation. And we have been called as a nation under God. May we stand up for that and be not ashamed that we have a God that controls us. A God, controls us, heaven forbid. He loves us so much that he died for us. So, Father, I just thank you. I thank you for this presentation. I thank you for the power of you, that you love us so much. In China and all these other nations, you have people who believe in you and walk in you and stand in the Word of God. And that you would continue to anoint us and bring us closer as one, and not to be divided. And not to be swayed back and forth, but to be in unity. I speak unity over each of us, under one nation, under God. And we give you glory and honor and praise, because the victory is around the corner. And I believe that, and I stand on that in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Barb. Everybody have a good night.